Good morning. December 21st. It's a Saturday. It's kind of chilly outside. Aaron Boster warming up my microphone, getting ready for our December live stream. iPoker Vibe is in the house. First to be here. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. We're going to be going live, of course, at the top of the hour. We've got a short 30 minutes till we get rocking and rolling. I'm starting to watch village members roll in. Bosnia is in the house. Amsterdam, Netherlands is in the house. Welcome, welcome. Hello, Sean Joseph. Thank you for being here. Belm is in the house, representing Bosnia. That's awesome. Carol Moore is here. Thank you. Welcome from New Jersey. Diane's in the house. Ireland representing. Matt Z is in the house, one of our wonderful moderators. Matt, it's great to see you. Penny Ake is in the house. Hello, madam. Great to see you today. Welcome, Fran Harris. Hold your questions until we get rocking and rolling. Good morning, Gus from Athens, Greece. Hello, Soren representing Michigan. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. KD is in the house representing Kentucky. Yvonne R. representing Quincy, Illinois. Great to see you. Hello, Caesar, good friend from Mexico, representing. Jenny B., thank you for being here. Oh, that's wonderful. Jenny, I may be getting ramen in Springfield later on today, actually. Richmond, Indiana's in the house. Hello, Crystal. Joe Sider, what's going on, my friend? Thank you for being here. Joe's one of our wonderful moderators. Welcome, everyone. Aaron Boster here, gearing up for our December Ask Me Anything live stream. Sorch is in the house, checking in from Ireland. Ahmed is here from Turkey. Fantastic. I like the traditional ramen at the Speakeasy. It's really, really good. Andy, what's going on? Representing California. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for jumping online with me, gearing up for this December Ask Me Anything live stream. I'm in the background setting some things up. While I'm getting things set up, please make sure to share where you're jumping online from. Please make sure to say hello to your neighbor as we get comfy and cozy and ready for this December live stream on this cold Saturday morning. Going to throw some polling questions in the chat. I threw our first polling question in the chat. What's your biggest challenge when managing your MS? Would you say that it's fatigue, mobility, cog fog, or emotional well-being? Hello, Sterling. Thanks for being here. Luca from Croatia. Thanks for being here. We've got Marina Lyons representing the UK. Laura's representing Syracuse, New York. Glad to hear that life is good, Miss Boyle. That's wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Baton Rouge is in the house. Hello, Beth in Columbus, Ohio, sharing my cold weather. Take a moment to answer the polling question in the chat. As always, we're going to be going live at the top of the hour at exactly 11 o'clock sharp Eastern Standard Time. Mike's representing Nashville. Joe says all of the above. That's fair, my friend. grab your beverage of choice. I've got my carbonated water here. I've got a cup of coffee. If you need to visit the bathroom or get yourself more comfortable with a blanket, go ahead and do that. Cozy up on the couch. We're going to get rocking and rolling at exactly 11 o'clock sharp. It's cold here in Ohio. There's frost and a little bit of snow on the ground. It's not actively snowing. Hey, hey, representing Texas. What's going on? What's your weather like in Texas? As you guys jump online, do me a favor and give this chat a thumbs up. That helps teach the YouTube algorithm that you dig this content. If you haven't answered the polling question, please take a moment and do so. The poll's been open for just about 2 minutes. 46 of you have responded. There's 63 online. If you haven't yet thrown your answer in the chat, please do so. The question is, what's your biggest challenge when managing MS? Fatigue, mobility, cog fog, or emotional well-being? What's going on, Carrie Perry? Joe Siders, one of our amazing moderators, leading the way, reminding you to join up with our monthly free newsletter called the Boster Corner. Joe, thanks for posting that. Hey Jude, good to see you. We'll leave the polling question open for a few more minutes. Austria's in the house. What's going on, guys? KD says it's cold in Kentucky. I hear you, Sterling. Yep. I hear you, Ginger. When the temperatures drop, it makes stiffness typically much worse in the setting of MS. Ahmed, that's a great question. Hold it for when we go live, and I'll be answering questions. Eric, great question. Hold on to that one. We'll try to answer that today. Angela's in the house representing Chillicothe, Ohio. Angela's one of our amazing moderators. There's 73 of you that have jumped online. We're 20 minutes away from going live. You can help out this channel by liking this chat and sharing the content with friends and family. I'm so excited. We just recently hit 79,000 subscribers. I feel like we might one day be able to hit 100,000. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to close the chat here. That polling question's about to close. If you haven't answered yet, this is your last chance. Most commonly, people said that fatigue was the limiting factor in trying to manage their multiple sclerosis. Thank you for all who participated. I'm going to queue up another polling question as we get ready to rock and roll this morning. There's a new polling question I just threw up in the chat. What's your preferred way to learn about MS? Is it videos and webinars? Is it blogs and articles? Is it working with support groups? Or do you prefer one-on-one consultations? If you haven't had a chance yet, take a moment and click your answer. We'll leave that polling question up for a few minutes to give you time to respond. Jesse, welcome. Lindsay's in the house, representing London. Great to see you today. Thank you for being here. Lindsay, that's a great question. Hold it for the chat and we will tackle that when we start up the Q&A at the top of the hour at 11. Good morning, everyone. This is Aaron Boster from the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis coming at you live for this December live stream. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I just threw a polling question in the chat. If you have a chance, please answer that. As you jump online, please remember to share where you're jumping on from. If you'd like to support this chat and make this channel grow, throw a heart, send an emoji, click the like button, and share this with someone that you care about. Let's try to help this growing global online village keep growing. Thank you for being here today. Jesse's in the house representing Plymouth. What's going on, Jesse? Carl knows the dealio, flaming up the chat. Rhonda wants to know about lipoic acid. We'll talk about that. Wow, Simone is representing Barbados. You may win as far as weather is concerned. Portland, Oregon's in the house. Lucas representing Italy. Thank you for being here. Good morning, Mystical Dream Fire, representing Ontario, Canada. That's fantastic. Brian's representing Ireland. If you haven't answered the polling question, please take a moment and do so. There's been 64 votes so far. There's 92 of you that have jumped online. Shanana has jumped online, representing Brooklyn, New York. Let me get a sound check, guys. Testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2. Let me know how my sound's coming through. I've got a new microphone. I hope that it's crystal clear, but you guys got to let me know. Cumbria, UK is in the house. What's going on, Lindsay? Thank you for being here. OPEC, what's going on? Joe says the sound is good. Carol says the sound is good. Jesse likes the sound. That's great feedback. Thank you for that. Take a moment and answer the polling question if you haven't already. What's your preferred way to learn about MS? Is it video webinars, blogs and articles, support groups, or one-on-one consultations? Thank you for the feedback, Bonnie. Thanks for joining us from South Carolina. What's going on, Jacob? Representing Denmark. I spent a great week in Copenhagen years back. That's an amazing city. Kansas City is in the house. Ontario is in the house. What's going on, Ree from Scotland? Sterling, thank you for the feedback. Glad the sound is working. We've got about 15 minutes until we go live. There's 103 of you that have jumped online. Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here. Terry is in the house representing Grove City. Zoe is in the house representing Delaware. What's going on, guys? Thank you for the heart. If you're as excited as I am, throw some hearts in the chat. Let the YouTube algorithm know that you are stoked to be here. Testas, representing Lithuania. What's going on? Wisconsin is in the house. Look at those hearts coming in. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you. This is Aaron Boster from the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis. Gearing up for our December live stream, Ask Me Anything MS. I am super pumped to be here with you today. If you haven't had a chance to answer the polling question, please do so. It's about to close. What's your preferred way to learn about MS? Video and webinars, blogs and articles, support groups, or one-on-one consultations? Thank you to all who participated. 67% of you enjoyed videos and webinars. Closing that polling question right now. We've got time for a few more before we start the live stream. As you jump online, make sure to share where you're jumping on from. Hit the like button. Throw a heart in the chat. Let the YouTube algorithm know that you dig this content. I just threw a new polling question in the chat. If you have a moment, please click your response. What's your top priority for MS Care as we enter into 2025? Is it access to better treatments? Is it more education and resources? Is it lifestyle improvements or improved mental health support? Take a moment and answer the polling question. I'll leave that up for a few short minutes. Make sure to get your vote represented. Good morning, everyone. Shelley representing the East Coast of London. Thank you for being here, Shelley. There's 108 of you that have jumped online, and we are 10 short minutes away from kicking off this December live stream. Sorcha, thank you for being here. Joe, thank you for being here, representing California Dreaming. Sean's got the right idea. If you like this content, throw a heart in the chat. Make sure to click the like button. That's going to teach the YouTube algorithm that you dig this content. Please answer the polling question if you haven't yet. Joe, that's not a silly question. I get most of my information by reading articles from pubmed.gov. I have a daily ritual of logging into PubMed and looking at all the articles that were published the night before. That's probably my number one go-to for keeping up. I would say my number two go-to is when I go to conferences a couple times a year, where I can attend lectures from the latest and greatest research that's going out there. Those are my two go-tos. That's a solid question, my friend. Living life slower, what's going on? Scotland is in the house. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here, guys. We're gearing up for our December live stream. If you're just jumping on, make sure to share where you're jumping on from. I love to go back through this chat after the live stream ends so I can see where all the village members have amassed from around the globe as we grow this online village. Hopefully with the goal of energizing, educating, and empowering families impacted by MS. What's your answer to my polling question? What's your top priority for MS care in 2025? Is it access to better treatments, more education and resources? Is it lifestyle improvements or improved mental health support? Let me know your answer in the chat. Nikki representing New Mexico, what's going on? Nikki, what's your weather like in New Mexico right now? Kay Lovell is representing Tennessee. Mira representing Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much for being here with us. Georgia's in the house. Thank you for being here. There's 120 of you that have jumped online. Wow, that's awesome. We'll leave that polling question up for a few more minutes. Sterling, I agree with you. MS is not nice. Poland is in the house. What's going on? Thank you for being here. Denver, Colorado is in the house. Woo, 60 degrees. 7 minutes until we go live. We have 7 minutes counting down. There's 129 of you that have jumped online already. That is amazing. Thank you for being here. This is Aaron Boster, the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis, where we care for families impacted by MS from around the globe. Even so, it as well as here, What's going on, lady? Thank you for joining us. She's one of our wonderful moderators and a YouTuber herself. We've got Nicaragua in the house. That is amazing. As you jump online, share where you're jumping on from, and if you feel like it, tell us what your weather's like. It's cold here in Ohio. South Africa's in the house. What's going on, Roxanne? Thank you for being here. Feel free to throw a like in the chat. Let the YouTube algorithm know that you dig this content. Respond to the polling question. It's about to close. Last chance to answer the polling question. What's your top priority for MS Care in 25? Right now it looks like lifestyle improvements is leading with 48% as the polling question closes. We have time for one more short polling question before we actually go live. I just launched our last polling question before we get rocking and rolling at the top of the hour. Please take a moment and provide your answer. Do you feel well supported by your healthcare team? Go ahead and give me your answer. Absolutely yes, somewhat, not really, no, not at all. Lauderdale Lakes, Florida is in the house. Lukewarm says, Caddy, thank you for being here. Boston, Massachusetts is in the house. 45 degrees down in Georgia. That sounds a little chilly, my friend. Now we've got 5 minutes left until we go live. The last few minutes before we go live, of course, you know how we do it here. We flame up the chat. So get your flames ready. "47 degrees in Houston. It is definitely wintertime, folks. No question about it. Good morning, Aaron Boster here, representing the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis, where we care for families impacted by MS from around the globe. I've been doing these monthly live streams since we opened the Boster Center 5 years ago. I am really excited to be here with you today. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be turning the cameras on and going live in 4 short minutes. Make sure to answer our last polling question before we go live. When we get down to 3 minutes until the top of the hour, I'm going to ask you to flame up the chat, guys. You know how we do it. Laura is leading the way. "35 in Texas. Woo-wee! Missouri, it's a little bit chilly. Babs fighting 29 degrees out there. 15 Celsius in Athens degrees. That doesn't sound so bad. We have 4 minutes until we go live. Make sure to hit that polling question. Do you feel well supported by your healthcare team? We have 3 minutes until we go live. Dope boys in the house. I'm going to sprint to the bathroom before we get started. I'll be right back, guys. Flame up the chat for me. Show me how we do it. 2 minutes until we go live. Welcome everyone. It's time to flame up the chat. You know how we do it. Sean's leading the way. Let's try to flame up the entire chat. There's 144 of you that have jumped online. Joe Sider is one of our amazing moderators leading the way. Sean leading the way. Show us how we do it, guys. Show some love. Let's teach that YouTube algorithm that you are as pumped as I am to be here today as we get ready to rock and roll. Carol Moore is in the house. You've got the right idea. We've got 2 minutes until we go completely live. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here. We're about to turn the cameras on in 1 short minute. I am getting pumped. Thank you for being here. Flame up the chat for me. Show some love. We're about to start the December Ask Me Anything live stream. Denise Whiting in the house. It's good to see you, madam. We've got Puerto Rico in the house. We've got less than a minute until we go live. Flame up the chat for me, guys. You know how we do it. Bienvenue au Québec. Carl's got the right idea. Jason Bell is in the house. What's going on, my friend Jason? I hope you're doing well. Trying to stay warm in the Midwest. We see flames in the chat. That's exactly what we want to see. Christina W. showing flames in the chat, literally counting down the seconds until we go live. Hey! Good morning, everyone. Aaron Boster here. I am delighted to be here with you today. I'm going to wrap up this last polling question. I had asked if you felt supported by your healthcare team. We've got about 141 votes, and the majority say absolutely yes, and that warms my heart. Thank you very much. For those of you that said no, not at all, it might be time to search out another healthcare team, if I'm honest with you. I'm closing the polling question. Steve Cullen is in the house, throwing chats in the flame. We've got one of my favorite folks from Israel in the house. Madam, thank you for being here, and happy Hanukkah almost. Welcome, everyone. My name is Aaron Boster, founder of the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis. I am delighted to be here with you today as we kick off the December 2024 live stream. This will be the last live stream, formal monthly live stream of this year as we gear up for 2025. I was just reflecting that I started the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis in March of 2020. Of course, less than a few days before the governor of Ohio saw fit to close the state as we entered into the global viral pandemic. We're now 5 years in, and it's an absolute joy to get to be here with you today. I started doing these live streams as part of this YouTube channel. It's really an awesome opportunity and fills my heart with joy to get to interact with you, to get to answer your questions live, to help amass this growing global online village. I am so happy to have you here today. There's a bunch of moderators that are in the chat. These folks are amazingly helpful to me. They're volunteering to help keep the chat clean. They're volunteering to help throw questions up so I can see them more easily. So if you see a moderator, their name's in blue, tell them thank you. Got our coffee here today. Some of you are throwing hearts in the chat. Thank you for that. That's a great way to let the YouTube algorithm know that you dig this content. Another way to do it is to throw a like in the chat. If you haven't done that yet, please consider doing so. There's 172 of you that have jumped online. I am excited to start to answer some of your questions today. So let's turn to the chat. Before we do that, I thought that I would try something a bit new, and I would answer a couple questions which are very commonly asked. Things that many people frequently ask, whether that's meeting a new family in clinic or whether that's participating in a live stream like this. And so the first question that I thought I would tackle is, how does early diagnosed MS work out? And how early is early? What's the earliest that you can identify that someone has multiple sclerosis? I think that's a great question, and I thought I would kick things off today by answering that question. So I'm going to work backwards. The most common form of multiple sclerosis we call relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. And I'm going to throw these terms in the chat, relapsing MS. Notice that I just said relapsing MS. I dropped that remitting. Why do I call it relapsing MS as opposed to relapsing remitting MS? Because it's more honest. The term relapsing remitting MS is antiquated, and I try increasingly not to use it in my parlance and in my documentation. The term relapsing remitting MS was first coined back in an era where we didn't understand multiple sclerosis very well. And it was borrowed from a different disease state, the disease cancer. And so when you look at the disease state of cancer, God forbid someone has a cancer and then that cancer is put into remission. And if the cancer comes back, they have a relapse of their cancer. And so that term was borrowed from cancer to apply to MS, relapsing remitting. And it's really a massive misnomer. It gives us a false sense of understanding because you might say, well, golly gee willikers, Aaron, if I'm not having a relapse, I must be in remission. And that's simply not the case. That's led a lot of people, including a lot of doctors, astray to think that if the patient's not actively having an attack, well, there must be nothing going on. And that is a far piece from the truth. So I much prefer the term relapsing multiple sclerosis. I think it's much more honest. Now, if we go backwards in time to the first relapse, the very first clinical event, we neurology nerd doctors have a term for that. We call that clinically isolated syndrome. So I'll throw that term in the chat, clinically isolated syndrome, or CIS. Clinically isolated syndrome is a way of saying you've had a focal neurological event. In other words, something bad has happened to you neurologically. You've lost a neurologic function. And when we try to figure out where that problem's coming from, it's coming from the central nervous system, brain, optic nerve, or spinal cord. And the most common clinically isolated syndromes that we see include optic neuritis, where the nerve of the eye is swollen, and that causes difficulty in seeing. It also causes pain when you look left to right and move your eye around. A second very common presentation of clinically isolated syndrome is transverse myelitis, where the superhighway, the spinal cord, is affected by inflammation and short circuits. And typically, wherever that area of damage is, below that area, you have problems. So oftentimes that manifests as difficulty with leg strength or numbness and tingling in the legs, or difficulties with the down theres, bowel bladder and bedroom. That's transverse myelitis. It's another common presentation of clinically isolated syndrome. A third common presentation of clinically isolated syndrome is a brainstem syndrome, where the base of the brain is affected. And depending on exactly where that is, we can see different problems. For example, double vision. We can see numbness of the face or weakness of the face, slurred speech or difficulty swallowing. These are examples of a clinically isolated syndrome at first presentation in the brainstem. And so when a human has their first neurological event like that, then there's a chance that they could go on to develop multiple sclerosis. This is the first clinical event. Back in the ancient days of yesteryear, before we had adequate neuroimaging, we would say, okay, that's not good. If something else happens, call me. And we would wait for a second clinical event in order to diagnose relapsing multiple sclerosis. Then we had the advent of the MRI in the early 1980s, around 1983. And that was a massive game changer, allowing us to look at spots on the MRI to clarify a diagnosis before the second attack. And nowadays, we have continually updated and revised those diagnostic criteria. We've gotten better and better at using the MRI machine so that we can diagnose MS 3 times faster. And so when someone has a clinically isolated syndrome, the first thing we typically do after we clarify that is we get neuroimaging of the brain, cervical, and thoracic spine, looking for spots, which would suggest to us that that person is at very high risk of developing MS. Sometimes those MRIs are adequate to fully diagnose someone with MS after clinically isolated syndrome. Now remember, the question that I'm answering right now is how early is early? How early can you diagnose MS? And I want to introduce another term. This is RIS, or radiologically isolated syndrome. I'm going to take a quick sip of water, and you know what that means. When I drink, you drink. We call that the MS Water Challenge, guys. So let me find my fun emoji here. There it is. Drink up, guys. Oh, that is really good. Woo! So, RIS, or radiologically isolated syndrome, is a really interesting diagnostic phenomenon. In the modern era, as I talk to you today in 2024, MRI machines have become ubiquitous. We see them in almost every emergency department. We see them in shopping malls. We see them certainly in hospitals and sometimes in doctors' offices. And if you go into the emergency department, there's a really high likelihood that they may do an MRI. And what we have found as we do MRIs more frequently, for all kinds of different reasons, is every once in a while, the MRI looks like someone has multiple sclerosis. Now, sometimes the person has not had any symptoms suggestive of MS. They have not had an MS attack. They've not suffered an optic neuritis. They've not suffered a transverse myelitis. They've not suffered a brainstem syndrome. They have no neurological symptoms. And their MRI kind of surprises us. We do a full neuro exam. We do all the things, what I refer to as the MS Olympics, and we don't see any problems whatsoever. Sometimes we'll take it a step further, and we'll even do a lumbar puncture, a spinal tap. And this person doesn't have clinical presentations of MS, and yet their brain scan looks like they may have MS. And this is before clinical presentation. We call this radiologically isolated syndrome. And because we do MRIs so frequently, we see this more and more. In my clinical practice at the Boster Center for MS, I'm referred patients that have radiologically isolated syndrome, I would say probably once every month or once every 2 months. And there's a risk that those people will go on to develop MS. Excuse me. What do we do in those situations? We do a couple things. Number one, we make sure that we see them in clinic to do full neurological examinations at least once a year, oftentimes twice a year, because we're looking for new findings on exam which will clue us in that we're seeing something clinical. We also will image them. We'll do MRIs of the brain and oftentimes the spinal cord. We may do that every 6 to 12 months for years, looking to see if the spots change, evolve, grow, if there's new ones out there. And all of this is in an effort to try to clarify, does someone with radiologically isolated syndrome have a risk of going on to develop actual MS? Now, the question I'm answering is how early is early? How early can we diagnose multiple sclerosis? And I'm going to take it a step earlier. I want to talk about what's called the MS prodrome. So the word prodrome is a doctor term, meaning symptoms which occur prior to the presentation of a condition. And so, for example, if you have the flu, all right, so you come in contact with someone who coughs on you or sneezes on you and they give you the flu, before you have a fever and before you have full-on symptoms of the flu, you might have some prodromal symptoms. Now I have to pause really quick. One of my internet friends is online. Everybody say hello to none other than Dr. Brandon Bieber. Dr. Brandon Bieber is an amazing MS neurologist. He's out in California at Kaiser Permanente, and this young gentleman has an outstanding YouTube channel. So if you have not checked out Dr. Brandon Bieber, please do so. Dr. Bieber, thank you for being here. And by the way, Brandon, he and I have been having a chat on Twitter recently, talking about actually a really hot topic, and that's the topic of the interference or the barriers that insurance companies will create. So If you would like to hear Dr. Bieber and I do a chit chat about that topic, Brandon, I would love to set that up and record a discussion with you where you and I can kind of game out and talk through some of our experiences. So if that sounds like something that you guys would like, let us know in the chat. If Dr. Bieber is willing, boy, I would love to do that. Make sure to say hi to Dr. Bieber and wave. He's an amazing benefit to the MS community, and I consider him to be a friend. Now, we're talking for a quick second about the so-called MS prodrome. And this is really interesting. When you look at claims data, so the use of healthcare as measured by claims data in the United States, and you look at someone who's diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and you go back, all right, you look 5 years leading up to that diagnosis, what you see is really disturbing. What you see is that the person 3 to 5 years before they develop multiple sclerosis will tap healthcare more frequently. People leading up to an MS diagnosis, they haven't had clinically isolated syndrome yet, they haven't had radiologically isolated syndrome yet, they end up using healthcare more often. They see their doctors in clinic more frequently. They will go to the ER more frequently. They will be admitted into the hospital more frequently. And they will use medications more often. Specifically, what will we see? We'll see GU, so the down there's. We'll see GI, the stomach and the gut. And we'll see psych. We'll see psychological problems. And that is a prodrome to multiple sclerosis. Now, the thing that really, really bugs me about this is that it's not something that you can figure out ahead of time. It's only seen by looking backwards and by saying, hey, this person that got MS, when we go backwards, we see that they tapped healthcare more often. And that keeps me up at night because if there was a way that we were able to identify the prodrome prior to clinical onset of multiple sclerosis, we might be able to start therapy super early. And that could have massive impacts in trying to sort out early diagnosis of MS and early treatment. Now, that's not an easy breezy thing to do, and there's a lot of tricks and traps that would be involved in that. But I wanted to start our conversation off by answering a very common question: how early can you diagnose MS? Everybody, if you look in the chat, my dad, Charles Boster, has jumped online. Dad, thank you for being here today. Everybody give my dad a hello, howdy, hi. Say hi to Charles Boster. Dad, it's great for you to be here today. We've got some amazing people online right now. There's 216 of you that have saw fit to jump online. Thank you very, very much for that. It fills my heart with joy. This is our December live stream for the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis, where we jump online once, what's going on here? Once a month, typically the last Saturday of every month, where I try to answer your questions live. It's an awesome opportunity for me to interact with this growing global online village and help keep us connected. If you're new to this channel, the goal of this YouTube channel is to help energize, to help empower, to help educate families impacted by MS. So thank you all for being here today. Let's change up the scene. This is the river scene, one of my favorites. And we're going to go to the chat and take our first live question. All right. So here's a question from Melissa Althouse. And she writes, my neuro states there's no way of knowing how long I've had MS. Is that accurate? Yes. When someone presents with multiple sclerosis, the way that we try to clarify symptom onset or the beginning is by their story. And so oftentimes when I'm talking to someone who's being worked up for MS, I'll ask them, go back as far as you can. Tell me a story of a time when you had a neurological problem that lasted longer than 24 hours, and then it probably went away and you maybe just tried your best to ignore it. So this might be I'm in college, and for about a week I was walking like I was drunk, and maybe my friends were teasing me, and it was a little bit odd and weird, but I just persevered and went to class and it went away. And I forgot about it until right now. Or this might be, I was in my early 20s and my hand went numb and it was really weird and my hand felt clumsy and I thought maybe I had just slept on it funny and that lasted for a couple weeks and then it got better. And we use that clinical history to say, okay, here was the first attack, and we write that down. And that's not a very accurate way of doing things because humans don't remember things very well. I don't remember things very well. If I try to think back to 30 years ago in my 20s, I would struggle to remember details. And as you can imagine, we are trying to live our lives fully, and we're trudging along, and we're going to school, and we're working, and we may have blown something off, not because we don't care, just because life is life, and we may not remember those specifics. We also will look at an MRI, and we don't get MRIs routinely as part of our healthcare, and so oftentimes someone gets an MRI when they present with neurological symptoms, or they've been having neurological symptoms and they finally make their way to a neurologist. And when we get that MRI, if we see those white spots, we don't know how old they are. A white spot could have appeared the day that person was born, or it could have appeared the day they had the MRI, or any time in between. Now, if we see a lot of white spots, we assume that this process has been going on for a while, but that's an assumption. And there's a couple ways of trying to tweak the MRI to try to get a sense of that, hey, this is brand new, or hey, this is really old. But generally speaking, we don't have a great way of going back in time to understand how long those spots have been there. Sometimes we're fortunate and the person had an MRI 10 years earlier for a different reason. I'm talking about MRI of the brain. And we can say, okay, well, the spots weren't there and now they're there, so it had to happen sometime in between. But that neurologist is not wrong, stating that it's very, very hard to accurately pinpoint how long someone has had multiple sclerosis. And as you can imagine, that can be really, really frustrating. Thank you for that question. Let's take another question. So here's a question from Blah Blah. That's a fun name. And before I answer that, let's change the scene up a little bit. I call this the purple scene. This is my favorite color. And Blah Blah writes, can the carnivore diet really help remyelination in MS? And then they say that there's some doctor that says so. And I think that's bullshit. Now, why do I say that? There's no diet that I'm aware of that's been proven to cause remyelination. And the carnivore diet is a popular diet. I think a lot of us enjoy eating meat. I have some patients that have lost weight doing a keto diet where they mostly eat protein and fat and they avoid carbohydrates, particularly simple carbohydrates. And I'm not saying that a carnivore diet is bad or good. I am saying that I lack data. I don't think there's any data to suggest that a carnivore diet can improve remyelination. Now, the jury is still out on diets, but what I will tell you is that what you eat does matter. What you eat matters a whole lot. And I have a lot of videos on this YouTube channel about nutrition in MS. So if that's something that you're interested in, I most certainly would check those out. And whereas I don't ascribe to a particular kind of diet per se, there's a lot of proposed diets out there. I think some of the more well-studied diets include Overcoming MS, which I think is a pretty healthy diet. If you'd like to learn more about that, definitely check out those videos. And if there's a moderator on the channel that could throw up a link to the playlist that I have on nutrition, I would be grateful. Sorry, I'm just checking. I'm actually anticipating a delivery today, right during this live stream. My kid has agreed to be on point downstairs to receive them at the door, and so hopefully I don't have to run downstairs and interrupt the live stream during that time. All right, let's take a look here and see if there's another question that we could tackle. I wonder if the music's a little too loud. Let me turn that down for you guys. So this is a solid question, keeping on the topic of diagnosis. And this question is by Roxanne. That's a great name, Roxanne, and thank you for being here. Thank you for asking this question. Roxanne asks the following question. I have a few brain lesions, but long cervical spine lesions. The neurologist suspects multiple sclerosis because I have oleclonal bands on my lumbar puncture, but is also considered NMO. Any advice to clarify? That is a really, really good question. If Dr. Bieber is still online, I guarantee you that Dr. Bieber agrees that that's a really, really good question. So let's tackle that. When we're trying to diagnose someone with multiple sclerosis, we're really using 5 elements. And I'm going to change the scene up a little bit. We're using 5 elements to try to diagnose someone with multiple sclerosis. The first is their story, the clinical history, because that makes it sound highfalutin. And when we're listening to the clinical history, we're listening for either a slow, insidious progression of disability, which would suggest primary progressive MS, or more commonly, we're listening for attacks. And like I talked about at the beginning of this live stream, when I say attack, flare, exacerbation, relapse, it's all the same thing. Those are the same terms, and we're talking about focal loss of neurological function, localized to the central compartment. So whether that be an optic neuritis, a transverse myelitis, a brainstem syndrome, any of these kind of things. And those can occur in the setting of MS, but they don't only occur in the setting of MS. There are other central nervous system demyelinating inflammatory conditions that can also cause attacks of optic neuritis, transverse myelitis, and brainstem syndromes. And so, although it's not nearly as common as MS, I would say a cousin of MS that can present like that is something called NMOSD, or neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder. There's another one which is even less common called MOG-AD, myelin oligodendrocyte glycoprotein autoimmune disease. I didn't make up these terms, guys. And when someone presents with an optic neuritis or a transverse myelitis or a brainstem syndrome, and we're working them up for possible multiple sclerosis, we additionally want to make sure that they don't have one of these cousins of MS, one of these mimics of MS. Now, I said there's 5 things that we do, and that's just the first one. There are some clinical features which might tell someone that they're more likely to have MS versus NMO or MOG, but they're not gospel. So, for example, in the setting of early MS, when someone has an optic neuritis, they generally fully recover. Not always, but most often. In the setting of NMO, for example, they oftentimes don't recover. The optic neuritis is much more severe. So you can see how, by teasing out the clinical history, we might put a check mark in the more likely to be MS or more likely to be another condition. Now, the second thing that we look at is the physical examination. And this can be tricky, but again, there are certain features which tell us this is definitely central nervous system, this is definitely the optic nerve or the spinal cord, this is definitely the brainstem. And that might not sort out MS from NMO. We can try. Again, the severity of the attack isn't always the same in both. You can have mild attacks in MS, you can have mild attacks in NMO, but all things considered, early on, we generally have more aggressive, more severe clinical findings on NMO, but that's not gospel. Then we get into the neuroimaging, and the question that Roxanne asked is in part related to neuroimaging. She says, I have brain lesions, but I have long cervical spinal cord lesions. MS lesions on the spinal cord and MS lesions in the optic nerve tend to be short. They're not very big. They tend, if they're on the spinal cord, not to involve the entire diameter of the spinal cord. They tend to involve the back half or the side of the spinal cord, not the whole thing. And they tend to be short. They'll tend to be less than 2 vertebral segments long. Conversely, in the setting of neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder, we see what we call longitudinally extensive transverse myelitis. So longitudinally extensive transverse myelitis are very, very long lesions, typically greater than 3 vertebral body segments, so much longer than what we see in MS. Same thing with the optic nerve. When there's an optic neuritis involving neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder, we typically will see almost the entire optic nerve affected. And so radiologically, there are features which would make us more concerned that it looks like MS or more concerned that it looks like NMOSD. But that's not gospel. Again, these are things that help us along the way, but we have to think about it in the totality. The fourth thing that we look at is spinal fluid. And here Roxanne shares that she underwent a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture, and there were oligoclonal bands seen on the spinal tap. And what I interpret that, what I assume that means, is that there were unpaired bands that were seen in the CSF that were not seen in the serum. So 2 or more unpaired bands in the CSF is considered positive and leans towards MS. And we generally do not see oligoclonal bands as often in NMO. It is possible, but it's much less likely. Whereas in MS, we see oligoclonal bands upwards of 85-90% of the time. So if you have oligoclonal bands on your spinal fluid, that puts a check mark in the more likely to be MS category as compared to NMO. Of course, it's tricky, and in MOG, we can see oligoclonal bands as well. So that's a helpful tool. And then when I said there's 5 things to diagnose MS, number 5 is, hey, Aaron, prove it's nothing else. I'm Aaron. And here's where there's some blood tests that can be very, very helpful. Whereas MS does not have a blood test to diagnose the condition, there is a blood test for NMO. And it's called the aquaporin 4 IgG. God forbid these were simple names. And the aquaporin 4 IgG can be measured in the bloodstream or in the spinal fluid, but it's more sensitive in the bloodstream. And there's different calibers of this aquaporin 4 IgG. And the one that you want is a cell-based assay, CBA. So when you have an NMO antibody test, you want it to be a cell-based assay because that's 3 times more sensitive than the old school one. And if that's positive, that's very, very helpful in trying to diagnose and clarify a diagnosis of NMO. If it's negative, you can still have NMO. So it's not binary, but that's a very, very helpful test. Also, the other cousin of MS, MOG, that I mentioned, myelin oligodendrocyte glycoprotein, that's a crazy name, it also has an antibody. And so I understand why Roxanne, your neurologist, would say, hey, look, there are some things in the MS category, there are some things in the NMO category, and they can try to clarify that prospectively. Now, one of the things that's important when we're doing antibody testing, blood testing for NMO, is that when you're not having an NMO attack, that antibody can drop off and go away. The highest sensitivity to pick up an NMO antibody is during an attack. And it gets more complicated because if you give the human being steroids, or if you give them a treatment for presumed NMO or MS, like if you give them IVIG or if you give them rituximab or some medication like that, that can also mask the antibody. So the highest time of sensitivity to pick up an NMO is to use a serum test, not CSF, to use a cell-based assay, and to do it when they're not on immunotherapy and when they are having an attack. And as you can imagine, sometimes we have to do that antibody test multiple times so that we can try to find a positive result. And this was an outstanding question. Thank you for asking it. I'm getting a little bit parched, and you know what that means. It's time for the MS Water Challenge. When I drink, you drink. Drink up, guys. Ah, that's delicious. I am not sponsored by any company, and so I'm drinking this SodaStream water. I'm not sponsored by SodaStream. I bought the SodaStream, and I love it. Many of you that follow the channel know that I happen to really like seltzer water, and I would spend a decent amount of money at my local Kroger's buying Kroger's brand seltzer water, those cans of seltzer water. But the SodaStream is fantastic. I can make my own soda water. So I put a little lemon in here, I put in my tap water, and then I hit this little button and it goes and it makes it carbonated, and I'm really digging it. So I've been taking a couple of these bottles to work with me every day, and I've been super enjoying it. There is 218 of you in the chat. That is amazing. Thank you very, very much. I started this YouTube channel many years ago, 2014 or 2015, and I just wanted to educate my patients in between clinic visits. That was really the impetus for starting this channel. I wanted to create content that I believed in, and I think I'm telling you the truth. So I don't mind making educational content. And over the years, this channel has really grown and it's evolved. And so, it's become this amazing online community. You are a member of this online community, and that means the world to me. So the fact that you continually watch my videos, the fact that you're willing to comment on the videos or give it a like if you like that video, the fact that some of you are willing to subscribe to the channel is amazing. And the fact that you're willing to give up a Saturday morning to hang out with me and up your game, hopefully to educate and empower and energize you with MS. I think that's amazing. Thank you for that. One of our fantastic moderators, Even So It As Well, has thrown up a link to the Boster Corner. This is a monthly newsletter that we put out. It's completely free to you. If you sign up, it will teach you the latest and greatest in what's going on in the Boster Center, what we have going on clinically, what we have going on in our research efforts. We have a large research department where we do a lot of clinical trials. Gosh, we may have like 15 trials ongoing right now. It's a very, very active area. It will also tell you when we go live. And so if you would like to not miss future live streams, an easy way to do it is to click that link. It's free to sign up. And we'll send you a monthly newsletter to your email, and it will tell you every single time that I go online so that you don't miss any of these opportunities. So let's take another question from the chat, guys. If you're liking this content, hit that heart button or give the chat a like. That lets the YouTube algorithm know that you like this content. All right, let's take a look here. So this is a great question. Liz says, hey, Dr. Boster, are there any updates on tolobrutinib trials for PPMS? When are we expecting results? So the answer is we don't have data yet. So the Perseus trial is a trial where we're studying the BTK inhibitor tolobrutinib. And the Perseus trial has almost completed. And so I think it's going to be wrapping up around this month, December. And I was hopeful that we were going to see some results soon, but that's probably unrealistic of me. And I recently asked one of the science liaisons at the manufacturer, that's Sanofi, and I asked them, when do we think that we're going to get a readout on the Perseus trial? And they told me it's probably going to be September. And so even though that trial is starting to wrap up, they're going to do a bunch of analyses, and we're probably going to get a readout on the Perseus trial studying primary progressive MS in BTK, and we're going to see that probably like around September or so. And so that's an update. That was a great question. Thank you for asking it. Let's take another question here. So Lorna Colin says, what can I drink that's not water, but it's nutritious? So water really reigns supreme. And the reason that water reigns supreme is a lot of the other stuff that we drink isn't so healthy for us. By the way, Brandon Bieber is jumping offline, it looks like. He says, have a great weekend, Dr. Boster. Dr. Bieber, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your support, partner. And again, I want to hit you up to record a video where you and I can have a frank and probably intense discussion about the influence of insurance companies and how sometimes denials and barriers to care can actually hurt care. Going back to the whole water discussion, fruit juice is not the way to go. Fruit juice is a problem because fruit, an actual physical piece of fruit, has a bunch of fiber in it. And if you eat a piece of fruit, not only are you getting the sugar, which is in the fruit, but you're also getting the fiber. And that fiber is critically important. It slows down the metabolism, it helps clean your gut, it feeds your microbiome, and it counterbalances that sugar. So Dr. Bieber says there could be a press release with top-line data before that. You're right, Brandon, but when I asked the medical science liaisons about that, they said that they're probably not going to see something until September. Now, I hope that they were wrong. I hope that we could see a press release sooner, but that's just what they told me. And I would love to hear the results. As I've shared before, we have several patients at the Boster Center for MS that have been participating in the Perseus trial. We're very committed to the Perseus trial, and I can't wait to get results. Fruit juice, compared to eating a piece of fruit, is a problem because you squeeze out all the sugar and then you throw out all the fiber. And so now you have a glass of juice and it's just pure sugar. And there's no additional fiber in there. In fact, sometimes in fruit juice, they take out a lot of the nutrients, even more than just the fiber. And you'll have these ultra-processed juices, which are basically just sugar and water with no of the electrolytes or other nutrients that we need. And so I think that fruit juice is kind of a trick. And we think, oh, fruit, that's healthy. But fruit juice is something to be avoided. If you like fruit juice, I would encourage you instead to eat a piece of fruit. And you can have all the delicious sugar from the fruit. And then in addition to that, you can have the fiber and the other nutrients. Soda leaves a lot to be desired. So a can of Coke, I used to live on cans of Coke back when I was in college, and I didn't know what I know now. A can of Coke has 12 tablespoons of sugar in it, which is insane. And it provides no nutritional value whatsoever. And it's a fantastic way of packing on calories with no nutritional benefit. And so a lot of us don't fully understand that, and we're thirsty and we grab a Coke or a Mountain Dew. They add caffeine into that, so that gives us a pick-me-up, and it provides no nutritional value whatsoever. Marla Hopkins, one of our moderators, says, what about making your own juice? Marla, I would say absolutely not, because juicing removes the fiber. You don't want to remove the fiber. There's some really good clinical trials that have actually looked at this phenomenon. And so water reigns supreme. I think coffee in moderation and tea in moderation are also solid, but I would be very careful about the other stuff that we drink. All right, let's take a look at some other questions coming from the chat. I'll give you guys a second to throw your questions in. Cheyenne says, probably next visit there's going to be artificial intelligence to diagnose and treat everyone. So artificial intelligence is exciting and scary at the same time. And we're starting to see artificial intelligence used in different ways in medicine. I think one of the ways that we're seeing artificial intelligence start to participate in MS care is in the reading of MRIs. And so I am real big on MRIs. I get an MRI of the brain in our patients at the Boster Center for MS once a year. And I typically do an MRI of at least the cervical spinal cord every 2 or 3 years. And there are some AI softwares that can be used to aid in reading the MRI. So I'm a big proponent of measuring brain volume. So to look at brain volume loss of the whole brain and then of the deep gray structures. There's different parts of the brain where we can measure the volume. And I find this to be very helpful prognostically as we evaluate a patient and as a therapeutic marker of sorts. And so there's a program that I use called NeuroQuant. That's a proprietary software which dissects out the brain and measures all those things and spits out numbers. It doesn't just tell us the volume of the brain, but it compares it to age-appropriate healthy controls and gives us a sense of how big is that brain compared to other people of that person's age. There's other software. For example, there's a program called LesionQuant, which literally identifies the lesion, color codes it, and can show you if it's grown or not. And so that's a legit application of AI, which is becoming used more and more. There's other AI softwares that look at brain volume. Ionometrics is one that I like a whole lot. And so I think that these are great assist devices. Now, do I think one day that there won't be a neurologist and that you'll just talk to a computer? I don't think so. I think that the role of the neurologist and the relationship with the patient is very, very important, and I don't think that it's going to be going away, not in my lifetime. And I would make a gentleman's bet on that. All right, guys, let's take another look in the chat, and I'm going to change things up. This is the wall. Some people really don't like this, and some people really do. I think it's kind of fun. Let me know what you think in the chat, if you dig it or not. There's 222 of you that have jumped online, and that's amazing. Thank you so much for that. That fills my heart, honestly, to see everyone on here today. If you're just jumping online, make sure that you share where you're jumping online from. Please type that in the chat. And as you ask questions, keep in mind that I can't diagnose or treat you on the interwebs, that you need to make your questions generalizable. If you'd like to show some love, go ahead and give the chat a thumbs up and let us know that you dig the content. You can hit that heart button. You can spam that heart button. And that's another way to teach the YouTube algorithm that you really, really like this content. Here's a question from Luca. And I think if I remember earlier that Luca is from Italy. And Luca says, treatment options for both RA and MS. So RA is a autoimmune condition, rheumatoid arthritis. And this is where the immune system attacks the joints of the body. And it can cause some very serious destruction of the joints. It can be very, very debilitating. MS obviously is an autoimmune condition affecting the brain and spinal cord. And many of us believe that if you have one autoimmune condition, you're at higher risk of having a second one. And I certainly see plenty of patients in my clinical practice at the Boster Center that have both multiple sclerosis and a second autoimmune condition, whether that be rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or psoriasis, etc. And so the question is, if you have two autoimmune conditions, and in this example, rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis, what are the treatment options? And the good news is that there are overlapping treatment opportunities where you can use one drug to treat both. So let's talk about what some of those are. So I would say one of the more potent therapies that treats both rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis are B-cell depleters. So B-cell depleters have been used to treat rheumatoid arthritis for many, many years. I would say the most common one that I see used is Rituxan, or Truxima, which is a biosimilar of Rituxan. And in the setting of MS, Rituxan is not FDA approved, but it does work to treat MS without question. There are other B-cell depleters which have now been used to treat MS that haven't been tested in RA, but they should work. And so these would be things like Ocrevus, Briumvi, Kesimpta. Those should work to treat both conditions. And so if I have a patient that has both multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis, I oftentimes reach for one of these B-cell depleters. Now, what else could we use? Well, there's an MS medicine, which has gotten a lot of press because it's being used as an active comparator in many MS clinical trials. And that drug is called Aubagio, or teriflunomide is the generic name. And Aubagio is the first metabolite of an old school rheumatoid arthritis medicine called Arava or leflunomide. Now, these are both pills, and if you have a pill of Arava, which is approved for RA, and you swallow it, the first metabolite is Aubagio. And so Arava in many ways is a prodrug of Aubagio. And both will treat rheumatoid arthritis and both will treat MS. And so another way of trying to approach treating both diseases is to use one of those two medicines. I use a lot of generic Arava, leflunomide, to treat multiple sclerosis because it's very inexpensive. Even if you don't have insurance, you can use GoodRx and get a script of leflunomide for sometimes like $20 a month, which is affordable to a lot of families. And so if you have both rheumatoid arthritis and you have multiple sclerosis, another option would be to use one of those two medicines. What else can you do? Well, in the setting of rheumatoid arthritis, it's very common that a rheumatologist will use other oral immunosuppressants, so things like methotrexate. Methotrexate, Imuran, Celsep, these are kind of like circa 1980s oral immunosuppressants. They're typically pan-immunosuppressants. And there is an old school literature that looks at these medicines to treat MS. Prior to the advent of the MS medications, these were used to treat MS, and there is some data that they work. There's some data that they work to decrease relapses. There's some data that they work to maintain arm function. And so when I see that one of my patients with RA and with MS is on one of those medicines, I think that probably benefits both diseases. Now, one of the things that rheumatologists are much better at doing than MS doctors is combining medicines. So it's very common that a rheumatoid arthritis patient under the supervision of a rheumatologist will be on more than one medicine to treat their RA. They may be, for example, on Rituxan and methotrexate, or Rituxan and Arava, or Arava and methotrexate, combination therapy. And I think that's pretty smart. We don't do that a lot in MS because of fear, because of concerns of stacked immunosuppression. And I think it has a lot to do with doctors being nervous Nellies, particularly MS neurologists being nervous Nellies. And I think that we always, of course, have to weigh the risk-benefit of combination therapy. But when I see an MS patient that's on, say, Rituxan and Arava, or Rituxan and methotrexate, that's someone who's probably going to have pretty decent control of both diseases. So that was a wonderful question. I really like that question. Thank you for asking it. Let's turn to the chat and see if there's another question. Before we do that, I'm going to throw up a trivia question. So when did the first MS medication become FDA approved? What year and what was the first MS medication to become FDA approved? So throw that answer in the chat. What was the first MS disease-modifying therapy to be approved, and what year did it come out? So throw your answer in the chat. Give a year when you think that drug came out, and if you know the name of the drug, throw that in the chat. I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to answer that question, and then we will provide the final conclusive answer. It's time for the MS Water Challenge, guys. You know what that means. When I drink, you drink. Let's drink up. All right, so the proper answer to the question was answered successfully by Jill. Beta-seron was the first FDA-approved MS disease-modifying therapy, which came out in 1993. And so many others in the chat got that answer correct. That's wonderful. If you wanted to be really, really technical, the first medicine approved for MS, not disease-modifying therapy, but the first medicine came out in 1952, and that was Acthar, ACTH. That's not a disease-modifying therapy, but that was the first medicine that was FDA approved for some indication in MS, for treating MS attacks. And it's interesting that when prednisone, the pills prednisone, were invented years later, they were compared to Acthar. But as far as actual disease-modifying therapies go, that's the correct answer. Beta-seron came out in 1993. When Beta-seron came out, this was made by a company called Bayer. When Beta-seron came out, they had trouble in making it quickly, and so they didn't have an adequate supply, and so it wasn't ubiquitously available to all patients impacted by MS. And in fact, there was a lottery in the early 90s where if a patient diagnosed with MS was trying to get Beta-seron, their doctor would enter them into a lottery system. And so if they won the lottery, then they got the medicine. Many of you that follow the channel know that I became interested in becoming an MS doctor because my family member, my Uncle Mark, had multiple sclerosis, and he's passed away now. And he entered into the lottery in the early 90s, and we weren't picked. My family didn't win the lottery. And so he did not have access to Beta-seron right when it came out. And so that's just a little bit of history. A little bit of trivia. Thank you for participating in that question. All right, so I'm going to switch the scene up. This is the Zen scene. I really like this scene. I hope that you do too. And if you look behind me, you see that Ohio license plate that says Fight MS. One of my amazing patients, that was his license plate, and he gave that to me. And I think that is so freaking cool. So, Mike, thank you very, very much for sharing that with me. I am very proud to display it on this live stream, and you'll see it in the background in many of the videos that I make. I think that's a really cool Ohio license plate that says Fight MS. I also think it's really cool that there's 218 of you that have jumped online. Thank you so much for spending the morning with me as we get together as a community, as a growing global online village. Gives me a chance to interact with you, which I love. It gives me a chance, hopefully, to energize, empower, and educate families impacted by MS. If you like this content, make sure that you throw a like in the chat. Let the YouTube algorithm know that you dig the content. Spam that heart button. That also lets the YouTube algorithm know that you really, really dig this. And thank you all for being here right now. All right, let's take a look for another question in the chat. I see some fantastic questions. I'm trying to find one here. So even so, it as well reminds me that a lot of people have asked questions about Lyme disease. And so I'm going to answer the question so that you stop asking questions about Lyme disease. Lyme disease is an infection. All right, so Lyme is caused by a bug, a spirochete. And it's oftentimes something that we come in contact with certain types of ticks. So a tick that you may find in the woods, there's certain kinds of ticks that carry Lyme disease, and it's not ubiquitous throughout the United States. So in the state of Ohio, where I practice MS neurology, we don't have a lot of exposure to Lyme in the north of Ohio. Now, as you travel south and you get down to the southern border of Ohio, we can have ticks that have Lyme disease. And when you're working someone up for multiple sclerosis, we want to check Lyme disease. It's one of the entities that can mimic MS. And so I think that when you're working someone up for possible MS and you're drawing blood, remember I said there's 5 things to diagnose, and number 5 is prove it's nothing else. One of the things that you want to look for is whether or not they have Lyme. Now, there's a couple different ways of testing for Lyme disease, and the blood tests for Lyme have become very, very good. Lyme disease is not an autoimmune disease, Tom. Lyme disease is an infection by a spirochete. You get bit by a tick, and they give you the Lyme infection. And you can test the blood to look for Lyme disease. Sometimes it's kind of ambiguous and we're not sure. And if we really need to know the real deal Holyfield about whether or not someone has been exposed to Lyme, or if they have what's called CNS Lyme disease, all right, because peripheral Lyme is not going to mimic MS, it's got to enter into the central compartment, then you can do a lumbar puncture and you can do what's called Lyme CSF PCR. And so Lyme PCR is where you're actually looking for the spirochete, the bug. And if you find the Lyme spirochete, the bug, then they have CNS Lyme. Now, fortunately, Lyme disease is treatable with antibiotics, but I want to make a cautionary comment. There are some quacks, some medical quacks out there, and there are some medical quacks that have Lyme clinics, and everybody that goes there, they say has Lyme disease, and they go through these long treatment regimens, which are expensive, and we need to be very, very cautious of that. And so I would say that depending on which part of the world you live in, there may be an increased or decreased risk of Lyme, whether or not you have those particular ticks that carry Lyme. And I do think that it's part of the workup that you have when you're testing to see if someone has MS. And that was a great question. All right, let's take another question from the chat. And I'm going to change the scene up again. This is the Northern Lights scene. I really like this scene. I hope that you do too. Let's see. So Liz brings up a fella that I really like a lot, a guy named Dr. Connor. And this nice gentleman has a great presence on social media. He has a PhD in nutrition, and he also has multiple sclerosis. He's a really smart guy. And so actually he and I are trying to connect on a different topic, and I'll certainly ask him about that. All right, let's look for another question in the chat as we're approaching the noon hour. This is Aaron Boster from the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis. You've been participating in the December Ask Me Anything live stream. I am so happy that there's 219 of you that have jumped online. That's freaking amazing. Thank you very much. All right, so Bonnie says, I'm losing more of my hearing and my vision problems. Is this from relapsing MS? It depends. Sometimes nature's too generous, and you can have hearing loss or you can have vision loss from something outside of MS. And it's really important that you work with your neurologist to ferret that out. And there's tests that can be done to try to help sort that out. Sometimes we have to do MRIs, we have to do special eye tests, we do audiometry, and we can try to figure out the cause of those things. And we don't want to assume that everything's from MS. We want to make sure that we can look for other ways of finding, because we don't want to just assume it's all coming from one thing. We have to have an open mind in that regard. All right, let's take another question from the chat, guys. Go ahead and fire out your questions. While I give you a moment to list your questions, we're going to have another sip of water. So Sean just commented on this expression, sometimes nature's too generous. I didn't coin that term. That's something that my late mentor used to say to me all the time. He would say, Aaron, sometimes nature's too generous. I'm talking about none other than the great MS neurologist, Dr. Omar Azar Khan. Dr. Khan was a full professor and the chairman of the department at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. And I did 2 years of a grueling fellowship with Dr. Khan back in the day. Omar was a great man. He was very difficult to be with, but he was a great man. He was a brilliant MS neurologist, and he took me under his wing and he taught me multiple sclerosis. I did a fellowship with him at Wayne State University. Dr. Khan passed away of colon cancer at the young age of 52 years. And as much as he was difficult to train under, I really miss him. And he used to say all the time, sometimes nature's too generous. And so I want to take my hat off. Omar, I miss you. All right, let's take another question here. Aaron brings up a really good point. Aaron says, I don't want to switch meds due to worsening effects. And so, when you're looking at an MS medicine, actually when you're looking at any medicine, there's a risk and a benefit to that medicine. That medicine is going to help the person hopefully with a condition, and that medicine is going to have some side effects potentially. And so we always have to weigh the risk and the benefit of the medicine. But that's not the only thing that we have to do. We have to place the risk-benefit of the medicine in the context of the risk of the disease. And so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I am more concerned about undertreated MS than I am concerned about treatable side effects from a medicine. And I'm very fond of saying, I want you on the most effective drug that you're comfortable taking. I made a YouTube video about a week ago on that exact topic. So if you haven't checked it out, I think it's called Treating MS, Are They Doing It Wrong? I want you on the most effective drug that you're comfortable taking. And when I say comfortable taking, that means that the drug is tolerable to you, that you can put up with the side effects of the drug, and that the drug is safe. And so I think that's a great question. Please keep in mind that the evil that we're fighting is multiple sclerosis. And we're using medicines, lotions, and potions that have side effects to treat MS. And the goal is that we make your MS boring with a medicine that you can tolerate. All right, guys, this is Aaron Boster. We've been live now for an hour, and this wraps up the December Ask Me Anything live stream. This is something that I look forward to doing every month, and I will do another live stream at the end of January. If you'd like to know exactly when that is going to happen, please sign up for the Boster Corner. It's a free monthly newsletter which will let you know when I'm going to be live. As always, thank you for learning about MS with me. Thank you for participating in this live stream. Thank you for all of your comments to my videos. Thank you for throwing a like in the chat. And until my next time that we get to interact online, please be safe. Have a safe and happy holidays. Take care. Be well.